Welcome to Wholistic Hearts. I am your host, Kristen Chadwick. It is my pleasure to have my good friend, Eugene Lunning, on the podcast today. My husband and I and our kids, we all attend church at the Anchor Gathering where Eugene and his wife, Jenny, whom you have heard multiple times on the podcast, lead beautiful conversations around Jesus. I inevitably every week walk away from church longing to dig deeper, to go spend more time with Jesus and experience the fullness of Jesus because of these two amazing people in our life. Eugene also has a life-giving, very simple gospel podcast called The Unionist, as well as a plethora of books, including one of my favorites for children called Moments with Jesus, which is basically a book of encounters for children and adults alike. So I highly recommend all of those resources. I'll put them in the show notes. So this week, being the Holy Week, Eugene is going to lead us through a beautiful conversation and teaching and encounter of both the processional and the recessional moments that we experience with Jesus. So I'm going to let him explain a little bit more and dive deep here and really stir our hearts. Here is my good friend Eugene leading us through this Holy Week.
As you've already perhaps noticed from the title of this episode, I'm recording these words at the start of the Passion Week 2025. So we're going to be out of the chronological order we've been following with Jesus, but let's be honest, it's always important for us to pause and to reconsider the cross and the resurrection. Somewhere around the midpoint of Jesus' 3-year ministry, we get to hear him offer a curious picture about his experience of living and ministering amongst humankind. He had just been talking about the importance of the ministry of his cousin, John the Baptist, and then, and I almost have to wonder what the look on his face was just prior to saying this, he seems to change gears a little bit. Here's what he says. But how can I show what the people of this generation are like? They are like children, sitting in the marketplace, calling out to their friends, "We played at weddings for you, but you wouldn't dance. And we played at funerals, and you wouldn't cry." For John came in the strictest austerity, and people say, "He's crazy." Then the Son of Man came, enjoying life, and people say, "Look, a drunkard and a glutton, the friend of the tax collector and the sinner." Ah, well, wisdom stands or falls by her own actions. Or in other words, Jesus is observing, you don't know what to make of me, do you? After all, religious history might have expected an ascetic like John the Baptist, and yet here came John and people revolted against his life, his lifestyle, his message. Conversely, religious history might have then been expecting a desire of a teacher walking in freedom, and yet here came Jesus. And people were all over the place about his life, his lifestyle, his message. Again, we don't know what to make of Jesus. And if you're tempted to think that human uncertainty about Jesus is relegated to the back then, I want you to listen to a series of quotations. These are deep, interesting thinkers of the highest human caliber and from throughout the centuries, and they are all trying to wrap their minds around the importance of Jesus of Nazareth. So just listen. First, our faith is not of our own acquiring. 'Tis purely the gift of another's bounty. 'Tis not by meditation or by virtue of our own understanding that we have acquired our belief, but by outside authority and command. Or try this one. Our heart, our reason, history itself, and the word of Christ all call to us loudly and decisively that a union with him is an absolute necessity, that without him we cannot attain our goal, that without him we are rejected by God, and that only he can save us. Or how about this one? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the enormity of this deed, of our killing our own God, too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? Or finally, what constitutes the exemplary superiority of Christianity? Christ and his saints. Pursuit of a style of life. Now, perhaps you'd listen to those and assume that they were, Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Martin Luther, C.S. Lewis. Well, you would be wrong. In the exact order I just offered them, they were Michel de Montaigne, Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, and the Frenchman Albert Camus. You see, in the presence of Jesus, each of these famously agnostic or even atheistic thinkers was tempted to believe that faith is a bounty, that union with God is possible, that his death rewrote humanity's history, and that the Christ-like style of life is the most exemplary lifestyle. In other words, they saw Jesus and didn't know what to do with him. They didn't know what to make of Jesus. Friends, since the day of Jesus, I believe that too much of human history has been given to not knowing what to do with him, rather than the glorious opportunity to let him do what he wants with us. No, we don't know what to do with him, but he always knew what he was planning to do and to finish forever for us. So I want to give you a pair of images, a pair of imaginings of two particular scenes, and then I want us to meditate clear-sightedly, personally, on what is being offered to us by Jesus. Ready? Okay. Imagine that you are walking through the dusty alleyways of Jerusalem, winding your way toward a main street. You are in and out of the shadows and the sunlight. Overhead, looking up, flapping up there in the breezes are lines of washings, drying in the warm air. You are thinking of nothing in particular, which, as is so often the case, causes you to be slow to notice an unusual impression. But then all at once, you realize there is something strange in the atmosphere of the streets and alleyways you've been walking. They, you start to realize, have been virtually empty. You stop and look backwards and forwards. Everything is almost perfectly still. You continue toward the main street, and the closer and closer you get to it, the more and more your steps are met by a peculiar noise. It swells, rises, crescendos, louder and louder. It's a curious sort of cloud of noises. Finally, you round the bend of a particular corner of a particular alley, and up ahead, you can now see from where the sounds are coming. You can see the backs of an enormous crowd, all fronting the edge of the main street. Well, you are nearly running now to see what's happening. Arriving at the rear of the crowd, pushing your way forward, in fact, to see what they're seeing, you are immediately aware of three strange facts. Firstly, turning to your right, you can see, up toward the edge of the Mount of Olives, that every single tree in your line of sight has been shorn of all its branches and fronds. And even more strangely, the crowd around you are all holding all these branches and fronds. They seem to be sort of trembling with excitement. Next, even more strange, the roadway right before you is literally covered in the cloaks of all the tunicked people around yourself. Yes, let's be a little real here. In place of the usual dung and urine and other rubbish usually coating the cobbles of the main street, there is this patchwork quilt of colorful outer cloaks carefully spread out. It looks like a lovely rainbow tapestry. Lastly, and you're kind of surprised you hadn't noticed this first, everyone in the crowds, on both sides of the street, by the way, are all turned toward the Mount of Olives. In fact, they crane their necks, they lean far out in unnatural twists of their body to see whatever they're hoping to see up yonder. Suddenly, a wave of shouts begins in the east. Those closest to the Olive Mount are exploding in a wave of shouts and songs and cheers. You are leaning so far out now, almost to the point of falling into the roadway, that finally you can see what all the commotion is all about. For just entering the city, having passed in through the gateway, comes a man on a donkey. From this distance, you can hardly, just barely make out his features. As he slowly ambles along, the donkey swaying side to side as donkeys do, the crowd from both sides of the street then kind of curls in behind him to follow him. So this feeling of a parade is actually becoming sort of this one-man show, swarming from behind with all the people who are shouting and singing. What is it they sing? You listen. Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest heaven. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. The boughs and those palm branches are waving in the wind as he gets closer and closer to where you stand. He passes. You watch him. His features are, all in all, like almost any other. Yet even as you're thinking that dismissive thought, sizing him up in order to diminish him, he turns, looks you right in the eye. For less than 1 second, you are looking into the eyes of Jesus, arriving amidst his processional. And in that 1 second, you know you are looking into the eyes of life. Well, 5 days later, let's imagine by some wondrous heavenly happenstance, you are walking on the outskirts of Jerusalem, a ways outside the city walls. It's already on past dusk. The light is swiftly dropping. You are walking along a path up and upsloping of a hill, and you are in and out of the growing shadows and sunset light. You've been out of town all day, and so now you're hurrying home for the Sabbath. You hear footsteps descending from above. You pause to look up, leaning against the trunk of a tree, and see 2 men coming down the path slowly, carrying something heavy. They are each of them on one side of whatever the load is. They are walking toward you very, very carefully, utterly silent, and you can hear the sound of the gravel and rocks under their sandals. They're almost to you now. You leave the trail open to their passing by you. They pass. You watch. You realize their load is an enshrouded body being carried to a tomb. Though you know it not, this is the recessional of Jesus. The 2 men then pass you by, winding their way down that trail you yourself have just climbed. You watch them go, then you turn for home. Processional and recessional. His coming and his seeming going. The shouts of the multitudes on a Sunday and the silent, mournful solitude of just 2 men on that Friday. Where am I aiming our attentions right now within this episode? Well, on the fact that often you and I would like to offer him a resounding shout of confidence, of praise, and then safely go back to the comfort of our lives. We would prefer a safely religious experience of what all this is, and yet keep the greater proportion of our time for ourselves. But here's a tragic little secret. The people on that Sunday who were the crowds lining those roads are probably the very same people who on that Friday give their vote to his crucifixion. When it comes to human nature, things rarely go as we would prefer them to. But my friend, instead, he is offering us himself and everything in heaven and earth that comes with him, and then never-endingly encountering us with the life that is his way of life. He would prefer an endless experience of abiding in us and we in him, for there he'll hold back nothing from all that he has always intended. And by the way, here's a delightful little secret. The people on that Friday who share in the fellowship of his sufferings are the very same people who will soon be receiving of his very Spirit. When it comes to the plan of God, we have very little idea of what he's up to, and by the way, that is wonderful. Over the course of this last week, all of this has put me in mind of one of my favorite images that the Apostle Paul ever writes of. This is from 2 Corinthians 3. Paul writes, "With this hope in our hearts, we are quite frank and open in our ministry. For the Lord to whom we turn is the Spirit of the new agreement. And wherever the Spirit of the Lord is, men's souls are set free. For all of us who are believers in this Jesus have no veils on our faces, but reflect like mirrors the glory of the Lord. We are transfigured by the Spirit of the Lord in ever-increasing splendor into his own image." As I close, I want to submit to you that the work of Jesus for you is toward limitless hope, entire newness, utter freedom, a face-to-face experience of the presence of God, and the transfigurement of your life into his. Again, my friend, we do not know what to do with him, but his hope, his newness, his freedom, his abiding offering, his transfiguring into his own image all began and was finished this very week that we're commemorating. So, will we both process and recess right alongside him? Will we let him have his way with these lives of ours? Thanks so much for listening.